Jeb has made a huge miscalculation. He used the imperial system instead of the metric system to measure how much fuel he would need to deorbit, and now he needs rescuing. Meanwhile, in a galaxy far, far away, John Drude's spacecraft has had an oxygen tank explosion. He also needs rescuing. So, who will be the brave and fearless person to go and help them? Me. Of course it's me. Who else did you think it was going to be? So with that said, let's go and help out these stricken space explorers. So firstly, in Kerbal Space Program, I build this rocket. This rocket is called Docker 2. Yes, my names are very original. This spacecraft has all the basic needs to get into low Earth orbit and save our buddy Jeb. Equipped with radiators, solar panels, reaction control systems, and one Valentina Kerman. And so let's begin by heading up the ladder into orbit, where hopefully nothing will go wrong and we will hopefully dock for the first time. Oh, and that reminds me, this is my first time ever docking in Kerbal Space Program, so don't judge. However, before we approach and then eventually dock with the spacecraft in Kerbal Space Program, let's move over to Juno New Origins, where we will build our spacecraft there and then launch it as well. Now, it's important to remember that I have way more hours in Juno than I do in KSP. I have like 2,000 hours in Juno on mobile and PC. So this should be easy. And the design of this orbital lifeboat is much similar to the one I just made in KSP. Once again, it has solar panels and some reaction control thrusters, but it doesn't have radiators because we don't need those in Juno. The orbiter will be launching on the HTS rocket I made on mobile a few years back. And I made this rocket so long ago that I forgot entirely what HTS stands for, so if you have an idea, let me know in the comments. And so let's hope that the first flight of this rocket doesn't fail, because that would be really, really dumb and really stupid, and I wouldn't do that, because this is a proven rocket. Yeah. Nope. Never underestimate my stupidity, apparently, because I have just accidentally pitched over too fast and we are now deorbiting. Let's all just pretend that didn't happen and undo and then relaunch into orbit. Oh hey, look at that, the HTS, I made that on mobile, I guess we're launching it now, it didn't explode before and we're all good, let's go to orbit. So we finally made it into orbit in both games. This was surprisingly the hardest part of this video, believe it or not. Now we are going to go back into KSP and we're going to try and get a close approach chasing the spacecraft that we want to dock with to save Jeb. So our first spacecraft burn is going to be to get our orbits very similar to the spacecraft we are going to be chasing. So I do a small burn to increase our apoapsis. I then got very confused as to why Valentina and Jeb's spacecraft were having these weird orbits that weren't aligning exactly. I then realized that there's actually a third dimension, believe it or not. It's crazy, you guys should try it. And so I did a planned burn to make our orbit aligned in the inclination. And now we should actually be able to make a close approach instead of whatever the heck I was doing before. So after doing that inclination change, we actually became very close to the spacecraft we're chasing, about 5 kilometers away. Which, let's be real, that was entirely my skill. So now that we're on our close approach to the spacecraft in KSP, let's move back over to Juno and do the same in that. Luckily, unlike KSP, in Juno, our spacecraft are on the same inclination, so this should be much easier. All we have to do is do a burn to get the apoapsis to match. And once the orbits are roughly matched, we are going to go out a bit so that the spacecraft can catch up to us. And after more time warping than I'd like to admit, we eventually got a super close approach of about 150 meters, which is kind of insane considering I didn't even do a burn for this. I kind of just time warped and it just happened. So we're going to let these spacecraft slowly come together and then we will be ready to start docking procedures. So we got our encounter in Juno. We're going to quickly head over to Kerbal Space Program and get our encounter there. So with Jeb's spacecraft now in sight, we'll begin slowing down our velocity relative to the spacecraft, and this will give us a much easier time docking with Jeb's spacecraft. However, there is one major issue right now that I very much regretted having caused, which was deciding not to bring enough monopropellant. So during the docking sequence, or rather the docking approach, I ran out of monopropellant. However, I did find a very janky way to make it work. So basically what I did was I made each spacecraft face each other, because in this case Jeb's spacecraft actually does have power since the solar panels are still attached, unlike for John Drude's spacecraft. So they were facing each other and I used the main engine on Valentina's spacecraft to push us towards it very slowly, and although they very much struggled to stay aligned, they did eventually just about line up and we got the dock. So we have successfully docked with Jeb's spacecraft, so we're going to transfer him over to Valentina's spacecraft, and then we're going to move to Juno and try and do the same for John Drew. So back in Juno, our situation is a lot less dire. We have plenty of monopropellant to use to dock, so I'm going to dock in a more sophisticated way, so to speak, which will be mostly keeping our spacecraft aligned in one direction whilst using the directional RCS to change our direction. Yeah, I did just say that. Why did I say it like that? And this was going really well until I overshot the spacecraft. I then decided to try and reverse and did this extremely risky maneuver. You would never want to do this around the space station or you would obliterate it. But after a lot of fiddling around with the RCS, we eventually got lined up with the docking port on the top of John Drew's spacecraft, and we approached and got the dock as well. So now we're going to move back into KSP and we're going to begin to deorbit and hopefully successfully parachute down to the surface of Kerbin. So we're going to do a few orbits around Kerbin with Jeb's old spacecraft still attached. Then we will eventually detach from the docking port, and soon after that we will begin our descent burn to Kerbin's surface. Once we get quite low, we'll deploy the fuel and service module for our rockets, and things are about to get very heated. The service module flies past us on fire and eventually smashes into the ground and explodes. However, we get lucky enough to have all 4 of our parachutes deploy, including the drogues and the mains, and we will eventually slowly float down to the surface of Kerbin and touch down without even exploding the heat shield, which normally happens for me. We'll plant a flag, do a little salute, and there we go, we've done it for KSP, so let's go into Juno and quickly try and do it for Juno. Hopefully we won't die. So in orbit around Drew, we will now detach from John Drew's old space capsule, doing much the same as we did in KSP, doing a descent burn. We'll then go through quite a long distance reentry, and eventually we will deploy the single chute that I didn't know we only had a single chute, but that was very risky, and we will splash down in the waters of Drew. However, the spacecraft does not seem to float for some reason, and so I will have to evacuate the Druids out of it, and they'll have to float in the water and be rescued, I guess. So there you go, that's docking in both KSP and Juno New Origins. Hopefully you enjoyed this new style of video, let me know what you think. I will be doing videos once a month now instead of the weekly sort of thing I was doing before, because I can put more effort into them and not become burnt out, maybe. And I'd just like to shout out Zenith, Heroics, and Sing Pizza just for being cool YouTubers. You should totally subscribe to them. And as always, I would love to thank our members, Sean Plays Too Much, Carnassa, Pedro, Reknarek, and AdamCat for supplying the funding for the music you can hear during the video, as always. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.